If you knew you weren't capable of raising a child, why did you feel obligated to have one?
For me, it felt like my son, was conceived for a reason, because I was on birth control. His dad and I were also taking other precautions to make sure that I did not get pregnant. And so when I got pregnant, it was like this pregnancy was supposed to happen. I have to give this baby who is going to be a man someday, I have to give him this opportunity to be here because I could just feel it in my body that he was supposed to have been born.
Welcome to the Minds Unleashed show with your host, Eric. Join him on the journey where we explore transformative ideas, confront challenges, and discover new perspectives. Together, let's elevate the mindset and transform your personal and business success. So whether you're seeking motivation, practical advice, or a fresh perspective, you've come to the right place. Join Eric on the Minds Unleashed show, and let's dive in together to empower your mind and unleash freedom.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Minds Unleashed show. I'm your host, Eric. As always, if you get value out of this, please share this podcast with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and leave us a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple. I truly appreciate it. All right, let's get into today's show. I'm so grateful to introduce you to today's guest, Allyson Roberts. Allyson is a cognitive behavioral expert, best-selling author of 4 books, and a TEDx speaker. Welcome to the show, Allyson.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. So I'm going to start us off on a great story, and that story is related to your pillow story you had with Sally. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, was Sally my therapist?
Yes.
Yeah. So Sally was my very first therapist. I've had probably, I think 4 or 5 my entire lifetime, which is pretty good considering I'm 59. So I find a therapist I love and I stick with them. But Sally was assigned to me when I was pregnant. I had just been rescued from living in my car while I was pregnant and had made the decision to place my son for adoption. And I had to go through her therapy process. And Sally was amazing because she just held a lot of loving space for a very angry 19-year-old teenager who had just been through 19 years of a lot of abuse at home. And she looked like my mom and she sounded like my mom. So my very first inclination was that I did not like Sally. But the wonderful thing about her was that she just didn't give up on me. And she is deceased now. And, it's a shame for the world that she did not live to be, elderly and give so much more back to the world in which we live, because she was just a very cool therapist, but she was more just a very cool person. She was the very first person who helped me start believing in myself. She was the first person who helped me really see myself in a brand new light, that I wasn't this unwanted, piece of garbage kid that was never going to amount to anything. Sally really helped open the door for me to understand that I could make something of my life. And I have.
That's amazing. So can you tell us what that kind of pillow meant to you during that therapy session?
Yeah. So, I already had an interest in getting into the psychology world and just giving back. But it was coming from a place of codependency and wanting to rescue everyone. I thought, if I rescue you, then I don't have to rescue myself. It's all good. So Sally really helped me see that the first person that I needed to rescue was Allyson. And that paralleled into me really wanting to help people get out of codependent cycles, and just become like the best version of themselves. Because when you grow up in dysfunction, what happens is that you believe the BS that you're telling yourself, and the BS is also belief system, right? So it's bullshit, but it's also belief system. So the BS that you're telling yourself is the trap that everybody finds themselves in. And so, Sally gave me a system of believing something different than what I had told myself growing up. And I've used that system for the past 30 years to help people understand that they don't have to repeat their trauma every day, and they don't have to live in those traps that we build for ourselves, that keeps us stuck.
So, like, you talk about this like topic of codependency. Can you kind of elaborate on like what that means and help us understand that?
Yeah. So codependency is, if you're okay, I'm okay. And if you're not okay, I'm not okay. So it's basically modeling your life after the people that are in your life to make sure that you perform on a certain level, um, which is basically people pleasing and keeping all of your opinions to yourself. It is walking on eggshells, making sure that the other person is okay. Codependency is modeling your life after the other person. So if you eat scrambled eggs, I eat scrambled eggs because I'm so afraid that if the egg is fried, that you may not like me. If you're into football, then I'm going to be into football, because, I don't want you to go off and watch football with other people because that means abandonment. If you take walks, I take walks, even though, my bicycle is a thing that I've done for 20 years, but now I'm in a relationship with you and you hate bicycles. So now I hate bicycles too. Like, that is what codependency looks like on a very, high surface level.
Okay. I think I understand that. So, like, is this codependency something that is frequent for children that have experienced that childhood abuse and experienced like chaotic upbringings? Or do you also see it on the flip side as well?
It's mostly with even kids who grow up in a quote unquote, normal household. If that child wasn't given the agency over their emotions, in other words, like if they're never asked, like, how are you doing? Or if they were asked, how are you doing? But then allowed to actually express the truth and not have to say, I'm doing great, school is fine, everything's wonderful. Like the kids who are taught, like, if you don't fit in this box right here, then there's going to be a problem. And sometimes that can look like really normal from the outside, like people that are taught to worship a certain deity, but they don't believe in that deity. People who, they have to do certain things with their family, even though they don't want to do those things with their family. But they do them to keep the peace and to make sure that mom and dad are okay. That's how codependency develops.
Okay. I definitely think I've definitely seen this in friends or my own child or upbringing, where you're trying to do the people pleasing, right? You're trying to be like, okay, I don't want to speak up on how I actually feel or what I'm actually feeling because, then bad things will happen, right? And you don't want those bad things to be on repeat because you know how you feel during those, and that's never a good feeling.
Right. And they can develop at school too, even though home may be extremely healthy. So, if you take a kid that, mom and dad do want to pour into them, mom and dad do want to hear like how their life is, and they do want to offer solutions and all of that. But if a kid is being bullied, or maybe a kid knows that their sexual orientation is such that they, they're not going to fit in, or a kid, is quote unquote a nerd, even though I think nerds are the coolest thing ever, but some people may not think they're cool. But if a kid is like a nerd, but everybody in the school is like super athletic, then what starts to happen is that the kid feels disconnected and ostracized from everyone. So they may develop codependency just to be able to survive.
Wow. So what does it look like to ensure you provide like a safe space for either children or also like friends as well?
A safe space is acceptance, right? So just accepting, if a child, figures out that they're gay, right? Then everybody just accepts it. They don't care. Like they just, it's like, okay, well, cool. I'm glad you told me, kind of thing. Or if, a child is like, I don't think I believe in Jesus. Like it doesn't make sense to me. Like I've done all the math and I just, I want to be Buddhist, or I want to be, I want to explore Native American history and become like a naturalist, or whatever the thing may be. Like instead of the parents or the friends like freaking out and saying, "Oh my God, you have to be just like us because we don't feel safe. If you're not just like me, then I don't feel safe. So you have to be like me, or my world is going to fall apart." Because that's basically what happens when people are codependent, and when parents are codependent. If a parent is codependent, they're not going to feel safe if their kid is different. And so providing safety is just accepting.
Yeah. I think acceptance is a big component of that, and sometimes it sounds like you just got to accept yourself, right? Where it's like, because if you accept yourself, I think more people are willing to accept you as well, regardless of what that thing is, truly. Because, you're not going to agree with everybody on everything that you believe and also that you want to believe or your future goals are. So when you kind of like, we take a step back, we go back and towards, you talked about, you saw your therapist and you talked about like, I like how you said rescuing yourself instead of rescuing others. And so what does it look like for you to kind of heal that inner child? Like, what did that next step look like? What did that next year look like?
It was rocky. I'm just going to be honest with you. Like, I think people think that healing is like, kumbaya and everybody sits around and passes the peace pipe. But for me, it was really rocky because I had to come into this acceptance of I was an abused kid, because I was in a lot of denial about that. And Sally was like, well, here's the 19 symptoms of a kid who's been, abused. And here's 10 symptoms of a child who's been, extremely abused. And Allyson, you have all 29 symptoms. So let's just, let's start there and get you into acceptance. And I didn't want to accept it. It was so scary for me to not be perfect, right? Because, if you're imperfect, then everyone's going to hate you and you're not going to be loved and all of that. And she was like, well, I mean, who's loving you right now? Like, where is your strong support system? As it stands right now, you were homeless, you were living in your car, you had no one to turn to. And so I stayed really angry. And anger is not unhealthy. I just want to make that like really, really clear. And most abused kids, you're not allowed to feel anything. You just have to perform and not feel. And so that first year, I was just pissed. I was pissed off. And that's the other thing that I love about Sally, is that she allowed me to just come into her space and just be like, I'm pissed off, I'm mad, and cuss and scream and yell and share my feelings and cry and be snotty, coming out of my nose, and just really feel. And that's, the first step to healing. I tell everybody, and this is why I love working so much with guys too, is because I feel like guys especially are raised to not feel. Um, be strong, be a man, and, suck it up and all these things. And so, when I'm working with guys, I'm like, listen, the very first step to healing is that you have to feel your emotions, and a lot of guys are like, no, I'm out. It's been cool knowing you, Allyson, exit stage, stage right. But it really, there's so much freedom that just comes when we start allowing ourselves to feel.
Yes, I love that. I love that because as a guy, as friends of that I am with guys, like, feeling that does not happen in our circle of friends. It doesn't happen. It doesn't really happen much for me. And that's kind of been like, something of my own personal development journey that, I've kind of started to do. So, I love the feeling. I also love the acceptance part, right? Because I feel like that's also the bridge that a lot of people miss. I also believe that you have to sit in the feelings and like kind of process them and go through them, and then sometimes dive deeper, and then sometimes kind of figure out like why. So I do love that.
So I have a grandson who's 6 years old right now. And, we just had the most like innocent conversation yesterday, but and we have to also remember that kids, they don't have language for what they're feeling, right? So yesterday he was like, I just, he calls me Gammy, and he's like, Gammy, I just need you to be destroyed, and because we were like playing, and I was like, destroyed? Like, what do you mean? I didn't punish him. I didn't get offended. I just held space for that. And I'm like, what, I don't understand why you need me to be destroyed. And he's like, because when you tickle me under my arms, it hurts. That's all. That was it. Simple conversation. Okay, I won't tickle you under your arms anymore. Do you want me to tickle you, on your belly and like up here by your ear still? Yes, just not under my arms. Cool, done. Like it's just like, in my world, if I had told my parents that I wanted them to be destroyed, it would have turned into this whole big thing of like, I'm a terrible, horrible kid. Like, how could I dare like say that? Like, why do I want them dead? Like, it would have just turned, and I would have been grounded. My mouth probably I would have been slapped, or it would have been washed out with soap, or it would have just turned into this big trauma thing. But all my grandson was trying to tell me was that he doesn't like to be tickled under his arms. Okay, cool, fine, it's done. And that's what I teach. Like, this is what I teach, is like, kids don't have language for what they're trying to express. And so you just have to hold space for that and talk through it. And a lot of times, even as adults, we don't have language for what we're trying to express if it was never taught to us,
Yeah. So like what does it look like for us as adults to kind of solve those like internal issues for ourselves, right? And like kind of go through that healing journey, right? We mentioned the feeling, we mentioned the acceptance. So like what does that look and feel like?
Yeah. So like, if I was working with you, Eric, and you're like, Allyson, I have this glass ceiling of income. Like, I can't get past like 50K or 100K, right? Well, the traditional coach is like, okay, let's get a strategy. Let's dive into your money, right? Let's make this work. In Allyson's world, it's like, oh, you've got a childhood story attached to money and your worth. And there's something going on there. And if you're willing, then what we would do is, Eric, where do you feel that in your body? Like, where do you feel like that glass ceiling? Where do you feel it? I'm sure you have a glass ceiling of money. Everyone has one, right? So where do you feel it, Eric?
My first question is, are you sure you haven't been like watching over my life to know this? Or I'm just wondering, where do I feel it? That's a great question. I feel like part of me feels like I'm still trying to process that, but then part of me feels, I usually feel the most in like my head area from like a pressure perspective.
Okay, awesome. So then what we would do is, I would say to you, okay, well, that's not 2024, Eric. So when was the first time, if you just allow yourself to go there without understanding that I'm not going to judge you, you can't be wrong. There's no wrong answer to this question. How old were you when you first felt that pressure in your head?
I would say 16 because that's when I got my first job. And that's when I had to start buying my own things, or, if I wanted a new pair of shoes, I had to buy them. If I wanted a new shirt, I had to buy it myself. So,
wow. So at 16, your parents made you an adult.
pretty much, yeah.
Okay. That's a lot. That's a lot of trauma for a 16-year-old boy to carry around, right? 16-year-old boys should be worried about, if the girl's going to go to the prom with them, right? They shouldn't. You shouldn't have to worry about buying your own shoes or putting gas in your own car, paying for your insurance, or getting your oil changes paid for, or buying a pair of Levi's jeans, or making sure that you have your lunch money. Those are still parental tasks that a lot of parents, you're not alone in this, but we're just going to stick with you. A lot of parents do this. But 16-year-old Eric, all of a sudden, instead of being able to have this freedom of being able to drive yourself to the library, now all of a sudden you've been handed the keys to adulthood. Right?
So I guess so what would you say to parents that have like an 18-year-old kid who are like, oh, but they are an adult, so they should be paying for the gas in their car and the oil change and all these things? Because it's definitely a balancing act, I would say, right? Like, you got to be supportive, right? But you also have to show them that like the support isn't forever, and you got to figure out a way yourself one day. So like, how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, so I'm a mom. I had a 16-year-old daughter. On her 16th birthday, I handed her the keys to her first car because she had shown me through good grades and other things that that she was responsible and ready for that. But I still put the gas in her Jeep and changed. I participated and still caring for her. When she was 18, she went off to college. So I'm not going to hand her the keys to adulthood at 18 when she's rushing for sororities and, trying to find her place in this new environment, right? So it's all about easing in, and it's also all about conversation, because I feel like sometimes parents tell teenagers what's going to happen, and it can feel like a prison sentence. Welcome to the prison of 18. Now, you're going to pay rent, you're going to go to college, you're going to, you're going to have, and believe me, I believe in being responsible, and I believe in adulthood, and I believe in breaking those ties, because at some point you got to jump in the swimming pool, even though, it's freezing cold outside, but you don't jump in without first knowing how to swim. And it's amazing to me how many men I meet, especially women too, though, I should just say people, that their parents never taught them how to balance a checkbook. They never taught them what a bank statement looks like, or what taxes look like coming out of your checking account, or what you can write off when you're 20, what you can't write off when you're 20, why you need to claim 1 and 2 on your W-2 form when you're getting, like, all of these things that that kids don't know. Adults don't know. So your 16-year-old right now, what your 16-year-old is telling me by having all this pressure in their head, and having a glass ceiling of income, is that Eric has to get it right. Eric can't make mistakes.
I felt it.
Yeah. Right. So you have to go back in and reparent that teenager and calm him down. Because right now he's making money like this, like, oh my God, 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 oh my God. And so we have to like get his nervous system regulated. And really the only person that can do that is you. And so if you were working with me, I would hand you all of the tools to be able to just go back in there and calm that Eric down, because that Eric is panicking right now. Because not only does he have a school load and he's got to fit in with his friends and he's got to have, a girlfriend or a boyfriend, whatever your sexual preference is, whatever's going on. Now he's also got to have all of this additional financial responsibility on top of it.
And usually when you're 16, 17, you're also applying for colleges. You're getting the pressure of like, oh, what job do you want to go into? Do you want to go into the military? Do you want to go to college? Do you want to go to trade school? What do you want to do when you grow up? And I feel like I had like conversation for like a year and a half of just, I literally don't know. Right. And you really just gotta just try it out and figure it out, So you almost got to teach your kid like that self-awareness practice, or almost like a trial and error, and figure out what it feels like to like something and what it feels like not like something. Because I feel like I've also struggled for, what does it feel like to do something that you enjoy, right? Like, what does that feel like, and something I did struggle with, and I've gone through it, figured it out. And it seems very like why would you even consider that? But if you have a golf hobby or a pickleball hobby or whatever activity you like, but you hate doing it, that's not probably the hobby for you, right? And so you got to apply that to so many other things. And I think maybe it gets, skipped up upon.
Yeah, like everyone in my family, and it's ironic now because I actually am considering doing it, but everyone in my family growing up, they were all golfers. I hated golf. I thought it was the most boring thing in the whole wide world, but every family outing was planned around golf. And so I was the one that ended up driving the cart. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be on the course. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be there. My whole thing was either tennis or running. And for me, like driving a cart around on a golf course, I would rather have nails jammed into the bottom of my feet. Like I just did not, and I was shamed for it. My whole family would be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that you don't play golf and you're so boring. And, just drive the cart and shut up," basically was like the whole conversation around that. And so a lot of kids though, like, and I wasn't even, by the time that I told my family, like, listen, I hate golf. I was in my 20s and I'm like, I don't want to be here. And they were like, "Oh my God, we knew it. Like, we knew that you hated it." But so many people don't ever say anything. They just go along. Like one of my friends, she cannot stand the beach. But her whole family, every summer they go to the beach, and she's 55 and she's never told her family. Still to this day, they just think that she loves the beach because she goes and she participates in all the activities, but she's crying herself to sleep every night in her room. And her husband is like, "Just tell your family, like, let's just tell them." And she's like, "No, because then I won't be invited anymore." And it's just like this whole thing. And it's heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm. So, like, how do you tell your family or your friends that you don't enjoy this activity, but at the same time, like, I guess it sounds like you almost still want to be invited, So like, how do you go about that?
It's setting boundaries, right? So what it would look like is, we'll just call her Charlotte, even though that's not even anywhere close to her name. So Charlotte says, "Mom, Dad, I so much love our family time. Like I love being with you guys so much. I don't love the beach. I know it may seem like I do, but I don't. So could we possibly, the next time that we all get together, could we possibly make it in the mountains?" Now, a family that loves and wants to support Charlotte is going to come up with a plan that maybe every other year is the mountains, right? So they're still getting their beach time as a family, but they're also honoring the fact that Charlotte is not a beach person and she can't stand it. You know, the family that's like, oh my God, Charlotte, why do you always have to be the one that is creating the drama? Why can't you just come here? Why is it that you even had to say anything? Those are the voices and the symptoms of a family that is dysfunctional.
Yeah, no, that's true. I love how you pointed out the difference there, because it's very important for people to realize what a healthy boundary looks like and what an unhealthy boundary looks like. And I love that because, like, it's great hearing you kind of tell all these things. Really around you've provided yourself that safety and that ability to be heard, but you're also providing that to others. And I can really see that that's like what you were missing as a child, and now that's been like your life's mission, right? And it's even in your Instagram tagline, right? Feel safe, be heard, And so I love that, because when I first heard that, of like what you didn't receive as a child is what your life's mission becomes, I was like, I feel like I just got smacked across the face with that one sometimes, And I listen to everyone's story, like you hear it get repeated and repeated, and I'm just like, wow. And so I love for you to tell us the story of your relationship with your boyfriend when you were 19.
Oh my gosh. So, well, it started when I was 18, and I had a 1978 Volkswagen Beetle that was yellow, and the gas gauge of the car didn't work. And so I never knew if I had gas in the car, I didn't have gas in the car. And every Sunday, I would do my best to get out of my mother's house and just drive out in the country. And so I was driving and my car ran out of gas. And I was on this dirt road out in the middle of nowhere. And I smoked cigarettes at the time. So I lit a cigarette and stood outside my car. And I was just like, well, shit. Now what am I going to do? Because I was too far to start walking. And about an hour or so went by, and all of a sudden I see this pickup truck driving in my direction. And the guy stopped, and he was like, really cute. I could tell he was in his 20s, and he offered to help me. And he was like, you can either stay here and I'll go get the gas and come back, or you can hop in my truck. And this is, it's so sad. Like, I would never in a million years ever tell a woman to get inside of a truck now. Like no way. But this was just a different time. It was just a different time in the world. So I got in the truck with him. We went to the gas station. It was about a 45-minute drive to the gas station. So we started talking. And 4 days later, I was living with him. Yeah. It was just one of those things, like we just hit it off. It was just kind of love at first sight, if you believe in that. And I was living in his guest room, and then it progressed to us living, sleeping in the same room. And it was the most beautiful, dysfunctional relationship that you can imagine. There were so many things that were great about it, and then there were so many things that, like, the writing was on the wall that spelled out disaster. One of the big things was that his dad had keys to his house and would just come and go as he pleased. It was very clear from the get-go that his dad was not enamored with me. And so at family functions, his dad would just like make really snide remarks to me about how his son picked up a stray dog from the side of the road, and just all these horrible things to me. And so when my pregnancy test came back positive, he and I were initially like really excited. And he was picking me up and trolling me around and saying, "Oh my God, this is amazing." But as soon as he told his dad, it went downhill very quickly. And his dad wrote me a check and told me to go to the abortion clinic. And I want to say I am pro-life as far as like all life. So it's really, people call it pro-choice, but I think that pro-choice is really pro-life. I think the terms are backwards. Agency over a woman having the freedom to make her own choices in life is pro-life. So, you know, I just didn't want to make the choice to terminate my pregnancy. Even though we weren't married, and all of those things, and the pregnancy wasn't planned, I just believed that it was fate, and I believed that we conceived a child together from love, and not from an accident. But I went to the clinic anyway because I was being pressured from my boyfriend. I was being pressured from his father. And I got on the table and was getting ready to be put to sleep. And I ripped the IV out of my arm. I probably could have just told them to stop and they would have, but I pulled it out of my arm and got chased out of the clinic because there was blood going out of my arm everywhere. And they were like, "It's okay. Like, you don't have to do this, but we need to like wrap your arm. You need to put your clothes back on. Like, it's okay." And they were very loving and supportive. And they were, one of the nurses was like, "What are you going to tell your boyfriend though?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'll figure it out when I get home." And it's one of those moments where, I think we all have those moments in life where we wish that we could take something back. And when he got home, I just pretended that I had gone through with the abortion. And I really wish that I could take that moment back. I really wish that I had just told him the truth, because lying is never the answer. And especially with something that big. So that went on, even though he never believed me. We played like he believed me for like another week, and then the morning sickness kicked in. So at 5:00 one morning, I was heaving, vomiting, and he came in the bathroom. I have long hair, but I had really, really long hair then. And he put it up in a ponytail, put a cold rag on my neck, and was just like, "I knew that you didn't go through with it because you weren't upset enough, And so I was like, "I'm so sorry that I lied." And he was like, "I'm actually relieved. I'm glad that you're still pregnant, but I just wish that you had told me." So we had this long, like 3-hour conversation on the bathroom floor. And he was like, "We're going to work it out. Don't worry. I still love you. I forgive you. Everything's great." And I went to school. I was in college, going to college, and I came home and all of my stuff was in trash bags, in the shed that we had. And I didn't initially see all of my stuff in the trash bags. So I went to open up the door and realized that the locks had been changed. And I was just like pounding on the door, but I could see through the curtains that he was sitting inside with his dad. And he was just sitting there with his head like hanging down. So that was our very short-lived relationship. It ended as quickly as it started, and I never talked to him or saw him after that day.
And you still had the child as well?
Yeah.
Wow. How did you like raise this child after you had chaos in your own family, and then, your boyfriend at the time you never saw again?
Yeah. So that's what prompted my decision to place my son for adoption. Was that he wasn't going to be involved. I knew he wasn't going to be involved. And so I wasn't equipped at 19, and then I turned 20 when I was still pregnant. I was not equipped as a 20-year-old to be a mother. I mean, shit, I couldn't even take care of myself. So I was in therapy trying to figure out who I was, what I was, where I was. I had, so when my son was born, I spent 3 days with him, and then I signed the adoption papers and released him.
I feel like I have to ask this question of, if you knew you weren't capable of like raising a child, like why did you feel like obligated to have one? Was it like that's like the culture and norm like back then? Or also, you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to.
No, I think it's a great question. Especially because we had the freedom then to make a choice, which has been taken away from us today, right? I think it was just, for me, it felt like that my son, was conceived for a reason, because I was on birth control. And in addition to me taking a birth control pill, his dad and I were also taking other precautions to make sure that I did not get pregnant. And so when I got pregnant, it was like, okay, this pregnancy was like supposed to happen. And I felt like that if I didn't give that pregnancy, and I knew too, like I knew immediately, I know this sounds weird because it takes a few days to get pregnant, but I knew immediately that I was pregnant after we had had sex one particular night. I was like, and I remember telling my boyfriend at the time, like, I think that I'm going to get pregnant. And he was like, oh God, don't even like say that. I was so careful. Like, you're on the pill, like, don't even say that. And I was like, it's just a feeling that I have. And then when the pregnancy test came back positive, I knew it was a boy. Like I just felt it in my whole body. And I'm like, I have to give this baby who is going to be a man someday, like I have to give him this opportunity to be here, because I could just feel it in my body that he was supposed to have been born.
Wow. So you gave him up for adoption, and I understand you were kind of living out of your car at that time. You got kicked out. Pretty much both sides, don't want to help you out at all. Like, so what did you do for college and job and career?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a professor that was substituting at the college actually realized that I was living in my car, and it was freezing outside, like way below like what you can survive in. Had I not been living in my car, in this little cubby of the garage, and had stolen, because I stole people's jackets out of lockers and towels out of the locker room. And like I was not an upstanding citizen, but you do what you have to do to survive. I was eating food out of trash cans. And so had I not done that, I probably would have frozen to death. But he rescued me. He and his wife rescued me out of the car. And then they connected me with Catholic Social Services. And then Catholic Social Services housed me and fed me, gave me medical care during my pregnancy. So I had to stop going to school when that was happening, because my pregnancy became complicated. I had a lot of medical issues that were happening. So they encouraged me to stop going to school, which I did. And then after my son was born, I got back into college, and then I get accepted into an internship. And in that internship, I became like the intake person for people at a battered women's shelter. And then we expanded it to not only battered women, but their children, because at the time children had to be separated and go into foster care. But we set up one of the first shelters in Georgia where women were allowed to bring their children. And so I got heavily involved in that. And I just made the decision to start working there full time and give up my degree, and just get into this whole system of battered women shelter work. So I was doing that. I was working for a security company at the time. I started doing some part-time work with the police department. So I got into that world for 5 years, and then I couldn't do it anymore. It is such a difficult world to live in and watch battered women die, because they go back to their abuser, or watch them have their kids taken away from them because they keep going back to their abuser. Like I couldn't, it felt, even though my parents were never taken into the system or anything like that, it felt too much like home for me, to just continue to see this dysfunction over and over again. So that's when I got into, I took a break. I got into real estate, and did real estate for a while. And then one of my friends was like, you have too much talent with people. Like even though in real estate, listen, I was dealing with people's emotions every day and counseling them, to keep a deal together and to, do all this stuff. One of my friends was like, you need to go back to school and really start working with people. So that's when I took a 2.5-year course in life coaching and got my certification in behavioral methodologies. And here I am. So I've been doing that since 2012.
Okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense to help give us that full picture, that full overview. And so your son was born. Have you connected with your son since you gave him up for adoption? And can you tell us that story?
Yeah. So I placed my son for adoption in 1985. And at that time, Georgia was a closed adoption state, meaning that I didn't know anything about him and he didn't know anything about me. The only thing that I did know was that his parents had named him David. So in 2010, I woke up in the middle of the night with this feeling to find him. It was so overwhelming. Like I couldn't ignore it. So I contacted Catholic Social Services the very next day, and I filled out on the paperwork everything that I knew about him. They were like, and this is really important to share too, that Catholic Social Services was like, you may never find each other, unless he's like actively looking for you. This is going to take years. And I was like, it's fine. I don't care. I want to look for him. Well, the very next day, they called me, and my son and I had faxed in our paperwork at the exact same time.
Wow.
To find each other.
Like you said, you felt something. Can you kind of describe what you felt? Like, why was it that night, like that moment that you felt something?
It was just an intuitive, like spiritual nudge, to just find him. And he also had the same kind of feeling and nudge to like get it started and to find me. And so the person that worked at Catholic Social Services, she knew that we belonged to each other, that I was his mom and he was my son, because of his birthday and the hospital that, they're like, where was your son born? I wrote the hospital. They were like, where were you born? The hospital. What time were you born? And so they were just like standing there sobbing, like piecing our story together, just being like, this is crazy. But yeah, like 5 days later, we were standing in front of each other at Catholic Social Services, reunited.
Wow. Can you describe like what it was like to see him for the first time and what your relationship is like now?
Yeah. So, seeing him for the first time, I don't think I was in my body. I think it really felt like I was in some kind of movie, just like watching this like scene play out. Um, it just didn't feel real. And it was crazy because the very room where I had signed like all the adoption papers was the very room that they put us in to get reunited again. So I think my nervous system was just doing like all of these things. Um, it felt amazing, but it also just, like I said, it just didn't feel real. And then I went to his wedding, which is why he wanted to find me. So I sat with his parents, at his wedding, and we continued to see each other. And then I don't know. I think maybe it got to be too hard for him, trying to figure out like where I kind of fit in to his life. And I would, and I told him from the very beginning, and I told his mother and father from the very beginning, like, I am not trying to be your mom. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. Like, I love his parents, and I would never want to do anything to hurt them. So he and I are Facebook friends, and we tried to see each other during COVID, but things got kind of weird. So that didn't happen. I'm hoping that I, can see him again someday, but I'm really leaving that up to him.
I feel like if I was in your shoes and I was going through that experience, that I would feel so much like grief and shame, and you almost want to like I feel like I would want to apologize. Like, did you feel like that at all? Or if not, like, how did you come to such like a level of acceptance?
I didn't feel like I needed to apologize because I don't feel like I did anything wrong. I never felt like I did anything wrong. And I don't say that in a narcissistic way. I say that just really in the way that I was explaining it to you before, which is that I wanted to bring him into the world. And had he stayed with me, he'd be pretty fucked up. And I say that with 100% confidence. Because I was, in my 20s, I poured myself into social work because even though I was in therapy and I stayed with Sally, in therapy for 4 years, I still could not wrap my brain around the fact that I needed to stop trying to rescue people. I just couldn't grasp it. And so he would have been kind of dragged through some of the worst times of my life. My early 20s were some of the worst years that I lived. I was just kind of an emotional basket case. So I'm glad that he had stability, in that time of his life. His parents love and adore him. He also was born with some pretty severe handicaps. And so, his parents had the means to make sure that he got like all of the hospital care that he needed and all of that. And I did not have those means. And so, I think, what I feel like what I need to say to him, and this is just coming to me right now in this podcast, is that I didn't feel like I was abandoning him, but he probably feels like he was abandoned, and right. And so I probably need to acknowledge and address that with him, that it never felt like abandonment to me, but it probably felt like abandonment to him, and just hold space for him to be able to have that conversation with me.
Yeah. And I think that is important because one, you've had such like a strong like reflection, and you've truly lacked like anything selfish for this relationship, and you chose not to put him through the trauma and the stress and the anxiety, and you chose the path of like peace and acceptance, which, I mean, most people can't even get to that point. And as well as, he probably does feel that abandonment, but then if you do hold that space for him, I think he can understand like, I did this to help you, right? Because if you came through my life, here's all the shit that I helped you pretty much avoid, right? And so, but that's nowhere near like any sort of easy conversation, fun conversation, but at the same time, it's like, looking back, you're like, I did the best for this child, and so I give you so much respect for that.
Thank you. Yeah, just, as we're sitting here talking, Eric, it just, and I've had this conversation so many times with different, interviewers and, even speaking about it from stages and things like that. But, I think because I continue to go through my own healing, my belief is that healing doesn't have, a stop sign. It may have a yield sign, but it doesn't have a stop sign, right? So, as I'm sitting here and you and I are having this conversation, I also am adopted, and I didn't find out until I was 42 that my father adopted me from my biological father, and so I know what that put me through. And just my whole family expecting me to be grateful and to behave a certain way. So I'm wondering, if his own family expects him to be grateful and behave a certain way because he is adopted.
Right. I guess I'm curious, I'd love to understand. So like, if you were to, maybe look back at your life and find a point where you would maybe foster and adopt a child for yourself, like, how would you go about like loving them and committing to them and making sure that they have that space to feel that? Because they could have come from, chaos and trauma and not feeling that love. So how would you help them kind of feel that way if you were to hypothetically adopt a child?
If I was hypothetically to adopt a child, I think that first and foremost, I would try to learn everything about their family that I could get my hands on, so that I could kind of learn the culture and the kind of the flavor of of where they came from, so that I could raise them in the best scenario, but keeping their like what's important, or what could potentially be important to them as a teenager, as a growing adult. Where did you come from? This is where you came from. This is the religion that your family followed. These are the practices, just so that they're not so alienated from their birth situation, and just to make adoption like an open book. It's like when my daughter was born, we celebrated her invisible older brother's birthday, every single year for years. Like we ate cupcakes, and, I named him Brian. I didn't, that's what we called him. We called him Brian. And we celebrated Brian's birthday every year, so that when it was time for David and I to reunite, my daughter wasn't like, what do you mean I have a brother? What do you mean? Like, it was just talked about, So that's one of the main things that I would do if I, hypothetically adopted a child, is that they would know from the second of inception that they're adopted, they would know that they can be mad about it. They can be sad about it. They can be mad at me. They can be mad at their adoptive parents. They can be curious. They can find their family. Like, it would just be something that is not restrained, because I think that that's the problem with adoption all over the world, is that kids are said like, well, you're adopted, so deal with it, you know?
Wow. I think have you considered like going to an adoption center and being like the person that like if a family member adopts a kid, can you be like the transition coach to help them out here? Because I feel like, between your story and what you have gone through and like where you're at, it's like, I mean, you can't really pick a better candidate at this point almost. And I think that is such a hard place to be for the parent, for the kid, for everybody involved. And your delivery of peace, acceptance, let them feel heard and seen is, I mean, it doesn't get any more, better than that.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that, that role, or at least to just speak, to these adoption agencies as, as a whole, with the adoptive parents in the room, and, to help them understand that, this isn't ownership. Because I think that a lot of times it's, and I don't mean any disrespect when I say this, but no birth mother wants to place their child for adopt. I mean, I had to be medicated. I was screaming my head off. It ripped my soul out of my body. It wasn't like, okay, we'll go and have a good life now. I was just, I wanted my son, but I knew that I wasn't the best for him. Right. So, sometimes I feel like the birth mother, I mean, I was completely outside of Sally. I was completely disregarded in the whole entire process. I had to fight, by not signing adoption papers. I demanded that they treat me like his mother still in the hospital, and, all of these things. And then I was just like thrown aside. And then adoptive parents are not trained, or like you just said, like they're not told that this kid is going to have adoption trauma. Like, that's not even talked about.
So like there's just so many questions of rabbit holes I could get into of like, what do you do for these kids? Like, how do these kids help themselves? And it's hard because it's like, as the kid grows up, like you start to like reflect on that life that you had, and you're like, and then you get this question in yourself, like, am I adopted? And then you kind of go through that rabbit hole of like, why didn't my own parents pick me, or why did this family pick me? And it just gives you so much, like, it feels like you have like a void of like, what is like love and acceptance? And then, in the beginning we talked about this glass ceiling, and then people pleasing. And it seems like that those, especially the people pleasing that you get into if you are in that position, because you just want to receive love from someone.
Yeah, because abandonment is that's our primal fear, right? And so it's like, oh, you were abandoned. I mean, I'm, like I said, like I found out that I was adopted when I was 42, which is just so ironic, right? You place a child for adoption, and then 42 years later, it's like, oh, by the way, your dad's not your dad. You're adopted. And it was like, but again, it was like, why didn't he want me? And when I did meet him, he was like, I don't want a relationship with you, and get out of my life. And I never wanted you. And, yeah. And so, that does a real number on on your self-esteem, and, all of this stuff is like, thank God that I believe in therapy, and thank God that I had like a strong foundation, because I don't know how people cope and survive with that,
Yeah. So can you tell us that story when you were 42 and you found out that you were adopted? So I guess for context, right? So the parents that you had growing up were your adopted parents, correct? Okay.
Well, my mother is my mother. But the guy that I thought was my dad was actually my stepdad.
Got it. Okay. And then you weren't informed of this until you were 42. And then I'll let you tell a story of how you found out.
Yeah. And it's so crazy because I had to go to summer school because my parents wouldn't tell me because I failed a science project. Because it was a genetic testing thing. And if my stepdad had been my dad with my mom being my mom, then my eyes would be green. And my hair would be like ginger red, but my eyes are blue. And, at the time I was a brunette. So it's like, and I kept like crossing and my parents still, they had every opportunity when I was 15 to say, this isn't going to match up because you're adopted, and they didn't. Instead, they let me go to summer school and pretend. I mean, I thought I was stupid because I couldn't get this science to work. And and even the science teacher was like, he had to have known. I mean, he had to have figured it out, but he was just like, I don't know why you're not doing it, but you need to choose another project. And so anyway, I have my oldest sister is an alcoholic, and she lives in Hawaii, and she had gotten into an altercation with police, and she was arrested, and all of these things happened. And so my stepdad was like, I think it'd be great if you, and my daughter could go over to Hawaii and just be with your sister and help her through this hard time. So I was like, okay, fine. So we flew over there, and right before I was getting ready to come home, my sister and I were having a conversation, and she was like, does it bother you that you're our half sibling? And she had been drinking for all these years. And so I guess she just assumed that somebody had gotten the guts to tell me. And it threw me. I mean, even with all of the things that I know and my training and therapy and everything else, I mean, I like today, looking back and my therapist today, like I've had the same therapist for a few years, and she and I like looked back on that situation, and she was like, oh, you definitely had a nervous breakdown. But I didn't know that I was having a nervous breakdown. But she was like, yeah, that's definitely what happened to you. That was definitely a nervous breakdown. It threw me. And then the other part that was like, so just like horrible is that my stepdad, because my mom has a sex addiction and that wasn't the only man that she was sleeping with, my dad thought this other guy was my biological father, and he ended up shooting him.
Jeez.
Yes, you heard that right. He shot him. He lived. My dad didn't kill him, but he shot him. And it was just like these just crazy, like Jerry Springer, like stories that are, it was just a lot to unpack. It was a lot to unpack. And it was a lot for my then 15-year-old daughter to unpack too, because this man that we just loved and adored, it's like the whole family and everybody knew. That was the other thing. Like both sets of grandparents knew, all my aunts and uncles knew, all of my cousins knew, like our childhood friendships, like everyone knew except for my daughter and me. And so it was just, it was just a lot. It was a lot. And they all tried to minimize it. And that's really toxic.
Wow. That's one hell of a way to kind of find out, that. And then you're also like, going through all that self-esteem, talk of like, oh, why is it now? And like all those things. And so Jeez. So you grow up in like this chaos and this toxic environment. You know, like you've gotten to the other side of this, and I guess like what kind of like tips or strategies do you have to get, like, how do you almost like maintain like peace within your family instead of chaos? And I would imagine that you either just choose not to have relationships with them because that's probably the best. But I guess if you do, like, what would you recommend for people to maintain like some sort of peace within their family?
Yeah, so I was able to maintain relationships in my family for about a decade. And then what started to happen is that because what happens when you have major trauma is that you, especially when if you grow up in trauma and then you have a traumatic event, what happens is that you go into survival mode. And so I was in this weird space of trying to heal myself, please them so that I didn't lose them as my family, plus try to find out information about my birth family. And in doing that, I found out that I was not the baby of 4. I'm the baby of 9 kids. And, my biological father had one of the biggest churches in Atlanta, Georgia. And he and my mom, had a 2-year affair. And I was like conceived in his church office. And just, that whole thing. And then finding out that my mother wasn't the only one. And he's had like this whole string of affairs. And then my mom, her whole thing with addiction is sexual, and just trying to just unpack all of that and still maintain this relationship with my mom, my dad, and the siblings that I grew up with, even though they had betrayed me, and they were all denying that it was betrayal, and they were all denying me of my feelings. Like, Allyson, we still accept you just the way you are. Like, nothing's changed. And I'm like, what do you mean nothing's changed? Like, my whole world is different. And they just wouldn't acknowledge that. They just kept saying like, it's the same. It's the same. Everything's the same. And I'm like, it might be the same for you, but it's not the same for me. So basically what ended up happening is that I started setting boundaries, and which was very scary for me to do, by the way, but I started setting boundaries, and my family would agree to the boundaries verbally, but then they would never follow through on the boundaries. And so one by one, I just had to start, cutting out the relationships. And the way, something that my therapist kind of, trained me is that 2 boundaries and an ultimatum and you're out. So what's the difference between a boundary and an ultimatum? So a boundary is like, Eric, when you and I get together, I need to have deeper conversations with you than just the weather and your cat, and the fact that your desk moves up and down and you can sit and stand whenever you want to. Like, we need to talk about this adoption situation. I need to figure out like why you felt like you could betray me for 42 years and all the things. And then that's boundary number 1. Then we get together and you change the subject every single time I'm trying to have a deeper conversation with you. And then I'm like, Eric, to me, it seems like you're avoiding the conversation. So my boundary is that we're going to schedule time to talk about this. not during the time that I'm at your house, but we can get over Zoom, we can have a phone conversation, we can do it in the presence of a therapist, and you're like, yeah. And then you just never schedule the time with me. So then a boundary becomes an ultimatum, which is, if we don't have this conversation, then I can't continue to be in a relationship with you. And unfortunately, every single family member of mine chose to not be in a relationship with me, as opposed to having a difficult conversation. And so then I went into therapy to grieve people who are still living and who just would rather not have me in their life than to have hard conversations where they have to admit that they made a mistake.
Yeah. It's like they let their ego pretty much get in their way, and, they chose that over, a couple conversations of being like, yeah, I fucked up and like, I'm sorry. And then like, having it grow and get better, right? Because on the other side of that is the light, truly, the light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. And I mean, the thing is that, all that I ever wanted from them was just an apology. And then, what do you need now, Allyson? And I don't think that that's too much to ask. My therapist didn't think it was too much to ask. An adoption support group that I'm participating in, none of those people thought that it was, too much to ask. And so, I think when we're going through trauma, and there, shame has been put upon us growing up, then we start to believe that we're too much. We're not enough, and we're also too much, right? So I started thinking like, well, maybe I'm just asking for too much. And so then I would drag the relationship out for another year or two. But it always came back to, I needed to have that conversation for just my own peace of mind. And to not get it was really heartbreaking.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't even imagine. But I am curious though, like, how would you maintain a relationship with, like, we'll use the topic of parents, right? Let's say you wanted to maintain the relationship with one parent, but not the other. How would you go about doing that? Because obviously they're together, they live together. If you talk to one, you might talk to the other. So, like, how would you go about doing that?
That is tricky territory to navigate. It's not impossible. But you have to have a parent who keeps your boundaries. And the healthiest boundary for that would be that you're not discussed with the other parent, because it's not fair to the child to not have a relationship with the other parent, and yet that parent is maintaining an arm's length relationship with their child through the other parent who's communicating and has a relationship with the child, right? So if it's, if you're my son, right, and I'm married, and I'm married to your dad, and you don't want to have a relationship with your dad because he's broken every boundary and he's abused you, but I've apologized, I want to make things right with you, then you and I just have to have an agreement that this relationship involves just two people, that it doesn't involve him. And then this person has to be strong enough to say, listen, you're not willing to apologize to Eric, and you're not willing to hear him out. You're not willing to have a relationship with him. So I'm not going to provide for you any information about him whatsoever. And that takes, I've seen it happen. It takes a very strong person though, and somebody who really feels very confident in themselves, and also a person that is not allowing the father to abuse them.
Yeah. I think that's the key piece there too, right? So you're not like almost like intercepting the the, the messages and the communication in the in between. I guess like, so now I guess my perspective shifts to like, if you're friends with Allyson, what have you asked of your friends to support you during finding out that you're like adopted, or your family members don't want to have a conversation with you? Like, how do you ensure your friends are also being there for you, being supportive, giving you what you want? Because it could be hard to be like, I just need space, or I need to hang out with you. So I'd love to understand that.
Yeah, it's so sad because I lost some friendships through that time too, because I became a different version of Allyson. You know, I before I found out that I had been betrayed by my family for that whole time. I was you know a lot more trusting and just a lot more open. And what happened to me was that I just shut down and I started to question everyone and everything. Through therapy, I found out that that's just a normal, natural process that we all that any person, anyone in my shoes would be going through that. But my friends had never had to navigate anything like that before, right? So they were completely, uh, and it's not their fault. Like they were unequipped to handle my rage. They were unequipped to handle, my tears, my devastation. I mean, we would go out somewhere, and even though I was in therapy, it's all I wanted to talk about. And so I also abused the privilege of having relationships with some of those people by not realizing that they just wanted to go listen to a band. They just wanted to go and play tennis. They didn't. So they started to kind of drift away. And then instead of me being understanding of them not wanting to have those conversations with me all the time, I got mad at them. So over time, I've gone back and said, listen, I'm so sorry, and I've gained back some of those relationships by just being like, I put way too much on you, and I'm so sorry that I did that to you. Can we mend fences? Some of the other people, three of my really super close friends, they just held beautiful space for me, and they have had their own therapy. So they would set boundaries with me, Allyson, we're going to go to do this thing, please don't talk about your family. This is a time for you to just, put all that shit on a bookshelf somewhere and just come with us and just hang out, have fun, relax. That situation's not going anywhere. It's going to be there when you get back home. We just love you. We want to hang out with you. Those are the people that I've maintained the really tight connections with, because they had the tools to put everything in its proper perspective and help me put things in its proper perspective.
Yeah. It's beautiful that your friends told you of like, okay, we're going to go to this concert. It's time for the concert, right? It's not time to, have drama and gossip or talk about these things. Like, and I honestly think that sometimes you need that, right? Sometimes you need that time and that space to just not think about, some of these things, because, it can be exhausting, for everyone around you. So I totally understand that piece. And sometimes it's nice to not think about those things for a little bit. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but, sometimes it is, you need to kind of get your mind and physical body into, better environments.
Yeah. And I will say that, they did me a huge favor, and I don't even think that they realized the big favor that they were doing for me, which was that, by being with them and them keeping such, a strong boundary. And then when I, because sometimes I would like mention something and they would be like, nope. And I would be like, oh my God, you're right. I'm sorry. But just, they helped me remember that I was happy and that I could be. They showed me that I could be happy again, and it's not to spiritually bypass what was happening with me. It wasn't to get out of therapy, toss it aside and just be like, I'm going to be happy again. But it was just to show me like, I'm going to come out on the other side of this. Like there is light, and it's not a truck barreling toward me. Like this is, there's hope at the end of this really dark tunnel.
Yeah. Well, Allyson, I'd love to get into the signature question, which is going to be the question that I ask every guest. It's a topic that I battled in my head often, and it's a topic I've had, discussed with some of my friends and families. And it's a topic of like, what is happiness and what is your life's purpose, right? And I think a lot of people ask themselves that question. So I'd love to understand, how would you define happiness? What does that look like for you? And how would you also define kind of your life's purpose and like why you're here?
I love these two questions. So to me, happiness is being in the present moment, like fully present in the moment. I know like when I'm walking my dog and, I hear his panting and the sun is setting and I'm listening to the birds and I'm not thinking about my business. I'm not thinking about, family drama. I'm not thinking, I'm just in the moment. Or like my grandson and I are together and I'm looking in his beautiful eyes and I'm in that moment. Or my daughter and I are having a conversation and I'm not allowing myself to drift anywhere else. I'm just with her. Those are the moments that I am absolutely the happiest in my life. And my mission and purpose, honestly, is to help people understand what I just said. And the only way to do that is to continuously be healing our trauma. And how do we talk to our intrusive thoughts so that they're not taking over the present moment that we're in? And how do we deal with the trauma that's trapped in our body that wants us to be in survival mode all the time and sending all these signals so that our head is heavy and our chest is heavy and our, like teaching people how to deal with all of that so that we can be in the present moments, really being and connecting with one another.
I love that answer so much. That was so well said. All right, Allyson, that wraps up this episode today. Thank you so much for being here. Where can listeners go to find more about you?
They can go to my website, AllysonRoberts.com, and everything is there that they need.
Is there any social medias you want to also tag?
Yes, you can go to Facebook. You can just search Allyson Roberts. I'll pop up. My business page right now is called Outrageous Freedom. It's hopefully going to be called Unapologetic Power in a couple of days, but you can Google me and it will pop up. I also have an inner child meditation that is free, and you go to my website, and I don't spam you. I promise you're not going to get 117 emails in 3 days if you get on my list.
Perfect. Listeners, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to DM me on all socials or give me any feedback there. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'm very grateful and appreciate you. Thank you, Allyson, for joining me here today.
Thank you.